I'm Julie Kohler, host of the White Picket Fence podcast. If you've read the opinion section of any newspaper lately, you've probably come across think pieces panicking about falling marriage rates. They make sweeping claims that getting married will make you happier, healthier, and wealthier. Some even say that getting married is a way to stick it to the elites. I'm not so sure about that. This season on White Picket Fence, we're examining the current marriage panic. We'll go beyond the rosy sheen of love and commitment and expose the darker side to all of this marriage talk and explore what becomes possible when we broaden our imagination around what relationships can look like. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back, Brown Girls. A'shanti here, the founder of the Brown Girls Guide to Politics, the one-stop shop podcast for women of color who want to hear and talk about the world of politics. As we continue our partnership with She the People, we are highlighting their list of 20 women of color to watch in 2020. We have two wonderful guests this week, Andrea Mercado and Lorella Praeli. Andrea Mercado is the executive director of New Florida Majority, an organization that engages historically marginalized communities to expand their participation in politics to make their lives and their community better. Can't wait for you to hear this amazing conversation. Andrea, thank you for joining us today. How are you during this time?
Oh, I think like everyone, just taking it one day at a time. How are you?
Hanging in there like everyone else. It's definitely an interesting time, but what has been really interesting for me to watch is how all of those people who truly didn't realize how politics impact their daily lives are now realizing it, especially people who haven't been really politically and civically engaged, who haven't voted a lot. But you are one of those people who has always been very politically engaged. So can you tell us a little bit about why you wanted to get involved in politics and especially doing work around voting?
First got involved as a young person who just saw a lot of injustice all around me and felt it deep in my bones, that we had to do something about it. And I was organized into organizations and into community organizations and helped co-found the National Domestic Workers Alliance and learned so much from fierce immigrant women across the country who were fighting for themselves and their families. And after the 2016 election, felt really committed to focus on Florida, on my home, where all of my family lives, between Miami and Jacksonville, and really have been lucky to join the team at New Florida Majority, focused every day on how do we expand democracy, how do we protect democracy, and how do we build power of the people and center communities that oftentimes get left behind in political discourse.
I was saying when it comes to uplifting people, I was actually really upset that I didn't go to the Democratic debate in Miami because you had this amazing large watch party that had a live band. So many people were excited about it. And I just thought it was the perfect fusion of politics and social gatherings and bringing people together. Why did you want to host that event during the Democratic debate?
Well, I think I was really inspired. It might have been one of the last times I saw you, A'shanti, by the She the People gathering and debate in Houston. I think the work of really elevating the voices of women of color in particular, to me, feels so important in a place like Miami, where, when I was growing up, the political space was so dominated by men and by conservatism and machismo. I think it brings me a lot of joy to help create spaces where Black and Latina and Indigenous women can come together and be our unapologetic selves and engage in politics our way, and drawing a lot of inspiration from women of color doing amazing things around the country. And that She the People New Florida Majority debate watch party in Miami was definitely a highlight last year. And, right now as we're trying to adjust to the new normal of what does it mean to not be able to do in-person events and how do we engage people in politics online, I think we have to remember that, we have to center ourselves, but also our joy, as well as, our righteous indignation.
I can't wait for us to get back to those days again because the She the People Presidential Forum was so much fun. I'm definitely coming to your next event because it just looked really fabulous. But you definitely hit on something that is new for all of us is how do we do this community work in this age of social distancing that we're now in. So when you're looking at New Florida Majority, what are some of the innovative ways that you're outreaching to people to try to fill in the gap during this time to make sure that people don't lose that enthusiasm and also keeping that eye towards November?
Yeah, I think definitely a lot of online engagement. We're doing a census and chill event, trying to continue to have political spaces online that people can join remotely and connect with other folks and get information. But I think the other thing that we've been thinking a lot about is just the digital divide is so real. I think I saw something that, over 30% of families don't have Wi-Fi in their homes. And so many young people just don't have access to a laptop, right? People are on their phones and with limited data plans. And so I think we've also been thinking about, we can't just reach out. Yes, we have to reach people on Instagram and Facebook and Spotify and all the places where people are congregating. But at the same time, we can't leave our elders behind and people behind that don't have Wi-Fi in their homes, and who could use just like a phone call of somebody checking in with them and see how they're doing and see if they need groceries or, just share some stories and talk with them. And so I think we're trying to do a mix of both and, and also making sure that we're still leveraging our collective voice in this time. You mentioned, it's like who's in office matters. And the failures of leadership, both in the White House and for us here in Florida, our governor refused to shut down beaches and tell people that, this was not a time for spring break, that we needed to stay at home. And he's been so resistant to do that. And so, here in Florida, we have some of the lowest unemployment benefits in the country. It's only $275 a week. And so many people are paid under the table, or are undocumented and are ineligible for benefits of any kind. And so I think it really does call the question of how are we going to lift our voices collectively to fight for our families, for our communities, and make sure that, it's not just corporations that are getting bailed out.
And when talking about workers, you're one of the co-founders of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And even during this time, we are seeing, again, just the negative impact that a pandemic can have on domestic workers. So going into November, what are some of the things that our listeners should be looking for when candidates are talking about workers' rights, particularly when it comes to domestic workers and labor laws?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that we can't leave people behind. And so we have to think about, domestic workers and farm workers who are often paid under the table, and people who work in restaurants. We can't leave folks behind. I know the National Domestic Workers Alliance is encouraging people to continue paying your house cleaner in this time. Like if you're fortunate enough to have a job that you can work remotely from home, but you're not going to have somebody come into your house and clean it for you, consider, the fact that you might be the only source of, that person being able to put food on their table. And, when I think it comes to the elections in November, I think we're going to have a lot of work to do to protect our elections, to make sure that our elections go forward, to insist that every eligible voter gets a ballot in the mail that they're able to easily fill out and mail from the safety of their home. We don't know how long this crisis is going to last, but there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we're protecting democracy and protecting the integrity of the elections. And so, we're just doing our best to continue to reach out to people. And I think everyone needs to understand. I think one of the things that we've really learned here in Florida doing some of our hurricane relief work is that how we show up for people in crisis matters. I think a lot of people, like you mentioned, are really frustrated with some of our elected leaders right now. And, we can see around the country really unevenness of, measures that are being taken. And even when you compare, what's being offered in the United States to what's being done in other countries.
And when you talked about everyone having the right to vote, I have to give kudos to you and New Florida Majority because you worked with other groups in Florida to pass Amendment 4, which restored the voting rights of over 1.4 million people with felony convictions. And just for me, criminal justice reform, banning the box are all really important things. And I know we have a lot of listeners who are invested in this work. What tips would you have for them if they were looking to organize something like this in their state?
Absolutely. I mean, we need to organize everywhere. You can't talk about Amendment 4 without lifting up the incredible leadership of returning citizens, people who were directly impacted by our unjust laws in the state, and the leadership of, Desmond Meade and the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And I think what was so inspiring to me about Amendment 4 was just to see so many different organizations, youth organizations, faith-based organizations, student groups, community groups, really coming together to win the largest reenfranchisement since women's suffrage. And I think it was a historic effort. And then, after that victory, the kind of energy that all of us put into registering people to vote. In Florida, there's 4 million young people and people of color that are eligible to vote but aren't registered, or are registered to vote and aren't voting. And so, we oftentimes, we know where the voters are. We need to talk to them. We need to find ways to engage them and bring them, into the process. And there's oftentimes this overemphasis on these Trump swing voters or these really narrow slices of the electorate that miss the big picture of all those people out there who could be part of our electorate if we were to engage them and talk to them. And at New Florida Majority, we registered over 70,000 people to vote in Florida since the Amendment 4 victory. And now a lot of people who volunteered with us and work on our voter registration team are busy calling all of those people to ask them how they're doing in this crisis that we're facing. And I think we oftentimes talk about, and many of our sister organizations around the country, that, democracy, it doesn't just happen on election day. It's something that we need to cultivate and nurture 365 days a year. So I think that those are the stories that give me a lot of hope of organizers who are out there talking into their communities week after week, building relationships, bringing people in. There's so many people out there who are really interested in politics, but have never gotten the invitation to be part of a movement for racial equity, a movement for gender justice, a movement for climate action. And so I think we definitely see that as part of our mandate, is creating a political home where people can get involved and be engaged.
And I love that. And that is so important, because I just hear from people all the time is they're just always looking for that one group where they feel that they not only share their same values, but they feel welcome and that people want for them to participate. And you've always been about that. New Florida Majority is about that. So just thank you for that. And for our listeners, if they wanted to support your work, what are some ways that they could do that?
Yeah, so folks can go to newfloridamajority.org or check us out on Instagram or Twitter, Facebook. We also just launched in a coalition with other organizations here in Florida, floridacoronaaction.org, as a space where people can find access to resources, food banks, or services, but can also get plugged into advocacy efforts and sign on to petitions to, call on the governor to do right by our communities, as well as volunteer to be part of this, this effort. Help us reach every elder, every young person, every family across the state, and to check in on them and see how they're doing and urge them to be a part of a movement for change.
Fabulous. So I want to switch gears for a moment and talk about your +1, Ashley Shelton from the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. Why'd you pick Ashley for your +1?
Oh, I just think that Ashley is just amazing. She's phenomenal. The kind of work that she's been leading in Louisiana to win elections, to win victories for marginalized communities. And there's so many amazing unsung heroes in our movement. And I think that Ashley is definitely one of them. There's so many incredible Black and brown women across the South in particular that get up every day trying to make a way and build power that centers women and people of color. And so if you don't know about Ashley Shelton and her work, folks should definitely check out the Power Coalition and some of the incredible organizations that are a part of that effort.
I love that. A common theme that we're starting to see in a lot of the +1s is people highlighting women that are doing work in the South, which is just very close to my heart because the work that I do at Emerge was really with our Southern expansion to get more women running for office in the South. So I love that whenever we're lifting up our sisters down there. All right, Andrea, I have loved this conversation, and I'm going to move us into our final question, our signature question that we ask all of our guests. What would you say to the brown girls out there listening saying, I want to be just like her?
I'd say that there's so many opportunities to be involved, and there's so many ways to lead for your community. So I guess my advice is just find a place to get in where you fit in. Find an organization that feels like home and feels like a place where you can learn and grow and learn from history too. And there's so many Black and brown women that we can learn from, like Ella Baker and Dolores Huerta and so many others who continue to guide us. Thank you for the conversation, A'shanti. Really enjoyed it today.
Thank you. This was great, and we'll chat with you soon. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can start communicating in under 24 hours. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. There's a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's counselor network, which may not be locally available in many areas. The service is available for clients worldwide. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions so you won't ever have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room as with traditional therapy. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches so they make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit their website and read their testimonials that are posted daily. Visit betterhelp.com/BGG. That's better, HELP, and join the over 700,000 people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. Special offer for the BGG listeners: get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/BGG. Meet Lorella Praeli. She is the Vice President of Community Change and Co-President of Community Change Action Fund, an organization working to make sure that communities of color and immigrant communities have the resources and power that they need to thrive. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Lorella, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm okay. It's it's Monday and we're coming out of a couple of hard weeks, and I think that the immediate future looks both challenging, and I like to think of it also as what are we called to do in this very difficult moment?
That's really powerful what you just said. And these really are interesting times where we are feeling this sense of grief. It's always important to name it, and that's what it is, grief, but always, manage to keep our faith too, that things will get better, and how can we make things better. And I think that's a great opportunity for us to talk about what actually drove you to want to get into the organizing movement.
Well, I think of this also there's a story of self, there's a story of us, and then there's a story of now. And for me, this really started a story of self. I was myself undocumented, grew up in the United States, but originally from Peru. I had a car accident that resulted in the amputation of my right leg when I was 2.5. And that was really the impetus for our move to the United States. First, it started as just trips, a lot of visits to Shriners Hospital in Tampa, Florida. And eventually, my family made a decision to settle in Connecticut. And I discovered that I was undocumented. And that's really how I came into organizing. I started to come into it really from my experiences as someone who was cyberbullied for having one leg when I was younger and in middle school. And then began to have more formal training when I began to meet leaders of the immigrant youth movement. And so it was really grounded in my own self-interest at first, I have to be honest. I didn't know about the power of movement and moving from individual to collective grievance and action, and came into it because I decided that I no longer wanted to sit on the sidelines and wait for someone to quote unquote fix the things. We always have choice, and we have the agency to move our dreams into reality. And as someone who was undocumented, that was really game changer for me. That this realization that even though we were in it to really transform lives by changing and winning policy, that at the root and at the core of it, it was about transforming lives by changing and transforming our own notions of self and personhood and power and authority and choice. And those were things that people couldn't really take from us.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the moment when you came out as undocumented. Astrid Silva from Nevada, she's one of my personal sheroes. And like you, she advocates on DACA so much. She talks about her story. Can you tell us a little bit about when you decided to come out as undocumented? Like, what was that moment like? Because there may even be some of our listeners who have not come out yet and have that strong and very real sense of fear.
Yeah, this was, I feel like the movement has different phases, and I came into it when people were beginning to come out and had begun to use their real names. So there was this power that came with really naming yourself and identifying yourself as undocumented, unafraid, and unapologetic. And for me, I was in college when I decided to come out. And in some ways, there was a number of things that sort of propelled me into this moment that served as catalysts for realizing I no longer could live a life of fear and shame. I spent a good amount of time feeling like just deeply ashamed, and very afraid of being discovered. Being afraid of being discovered because it meant I carried the stigma, being ashamed of being discovered because it meant I could be detained and deported and separated from my family and my country. It was actually when I was a sophomore going into my junior year, several things happened in my life. One of which, I was doing this research fellowship at Quinnipiac University, which is where I went to school. And my mom had saved up money for us to get a car so that I could really be based in New Haven. I was studying the different impact of municipal policies, looking at New Haven and Danbury, Connecticut, which had very different ways of treating immigrants in their city.
And shortly after I got the car, I was actually rear-ended. And the reason why I think about this moment as a catalyst in my life was because in the course of doing the paperwork for the car accident, and doing all of the insurance paperwork, I realized, or I learned that, the $400 insurance payments that my mother was making every month was actually not just to cover for the cost of insuring our car, but it was actually for my friends' cars as well. It was not something that had been disclosed to me. And so it was a really painful moment in my life. Also at a time when I had no one to really talk to about it because people didn't know I was undocumented. And just feeling like I had no real agency in that moment, and feeling like I was manipulated. And, even in my engagement with my then friend, I couldn't be real, right? Because this person also was technically the owner of the car. The title was in their name, the insurance was in their name. And so you're sort of trying to game out, how do you protect yourself and your family in the midst of all of this? It's so important to remember in the work that we do, what were those moments? And I think instead of retreating in that moment, it really served as a catalyst for who do I need to talk to in this moment? How do I get involved? And I was connected to an organizer. His name is Carlos Saavedra, who was then with United We Dream, which is the largest immigrant youth-led network. And we got on the phone and he's like, "What's your story?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, let me model it for you." And then I shared my story, and he said, "Actually, this is the perfect time because you can come to Kentucky." I was like, "Kentucky, huh?" He's like, "In 2 weeks we have our national field planning meeting." This was in 2010. And that moment, getting in a car and heading to Kentucky with, I think it was a large van. It was 14 or 16 of us, some mixed status. It was a mixed status van. Some people had U.S. citizenship, other people were undocumented. And this was my first real sort of experience being with people who were in similar situations. And I walked into a room and there were about 150, 200 young people. Some of them were wearing undocumented, unafraid, unapologetic t-shirts. And I was like, is this for real? Like, how do you feel that much pride, And it's just that began to change the course of my story and my life. And shortly after that, I decided to come out.
I love that. I love that so much. And then shout out too for them for having a meeting in Kentucky. I'm all about organizing in the South. So I absolutely love that they did that. And some of my favorite people live in Kentucky. So this is also telling people, don't sleep on having conferences in Kentucky. It's actually a really great state. Don't let the awful senators there make you not want to go there. In continuing to talk about how you have just been so unapologetic and outspoken, you continue to really speak up against the Trump administration and just their prolonged assault on immigrant rights and just the hatred that comes out of it. Right now, during the COVID pandemic, we're seeing the Asian community under attack, but simultaneously still seeing all of the other communities of color under attack. So with the 2020 presidential election coming up, when it comes to immigration reform, what should we be paying attention to, not only at the presidential level, but also at the state and local level too?
Our movement has much work to do to really build power, to win transformational change. And, at Community Change and Community Change Action, we have spent several decades really building a network called the FIRM Network, Fair Immigration Reform Movement. And this is a network of state coalitions or state organizations that really focus on building the power of immigrants and driving change at the local, at the state, and at the federal level when they come together into this network. I think we've got to continue on that front. Like, we can't get sidetracked, sort of move around from thing to thing, right? Because it's so easy to get caught up in the rapid response piece. We've got to do the right amount of rapid response, and we have to do the right amount of long-term power building. And we have to drive campaigns that change lives and that ultimately win policy outcomes. And so when I think about this year, I think narrative and narrative power is critical. We are already seeing the Trump administration drive a narrative and try to make COVID-19 about the China virus, as he calls it, as opposed to, this is what we have to deal with. It's here. How do we solve for it? How do we prepare as a nation to respond? And, but I would say, actually, it's not even just about this moment, right? You think about the way that he launched his campaign. So we could also start there. That moment when he came down the elevator and said that Mexicans only sent their worst people. Or we can actually go back further and actually say the moment that we are in and the kind of constructs that we have, the real structural barriers that we have for people to live a life of dignity and freedom and justice, they started way before Trump, and they will be here long after Trump unless we actually intervene and reckon with our history and our past and try to write a new chapter for the immigrant justice movement. So I like to think of it as it's not just a Trump problem. It's actually, both Democrats and Republicans have built a system that targets undocumented people, that seeks to identify, to apprehend, to detain, to deport them. And for many decades, there's been sort of, an assumption and a practice that in order to win legalization, we have to actually build a more operationally robust deportation machinery. And what you're seeing in this moment is actually a remaking of a movement that's trying to grapple with its history and trying to set a new course and trying to say, how do you actually decouple these things? That's not to say it hasn't existed before. Like, this is a new thinking, but I would say that living under Trump has turbocharged that kind of focus and that real commitment across movement to really enter into the practice of radical imagination, right? And to say, we will not look and settle for the world as it is. Our job as social justice organizers is actually to remake it. And that starts in our own imagination, in our organizing practice, and then in its application in the world.
And you mentioned community change action. So I want to say kudos to you because you are the first woman and the first woman of color to be appointed as co-president of Community Change Action and vice president of Community Change. We love a trailblazing woman. So tell us a little bit more about the work that you all do.
Yeah, so I would say, our work is really about transforming lives and building power to win. And we believe at our core that those who are closest to the pain are closest to the solution. And that if we build a movement led by people who are impacted, led by low income people of color, led by immigrants, that the community itself has the power to change policy, institution, to develop the big ideas for change and to build the kind of narratives that we need in order to make those things real. And so that's really what community change is about. And I couldn't be more excited to be co-president of the organizations with my partner in crime, Dorian Warren, who's, a year and a half into the job. And so we both, we're now sitting in an organization that's 51 years old, that has 51 years of history, and working with our staff, our partners at the national level, and importantly, at the state and local level, to really think about how we change, how we win for immigrants, how we win for low-income people of color, so that we can move from survival to thriving is really the way I think about it. And, if we build an electoral powerhouse, if we build people power, if we build powerful ideas and narrative power, we believe, right, that we can achieve something we haven't yet seen. And that's the beauty of community change. It's complexity, it's power, and it's beauty. And I'm excited to help write this next chapter with my team.
Awesome. And someone on your team who you listed as your plus one was Gracia Lima. Tell us why you chose her.
Gracia is a powerhouse. She's based in Arizona, also formerly undocumented.
When I think about Grecia, I think about young women of color who are really committed to not just winning for the sake of winning, or not just winning because winning is important, but winning as broadly defined. Every time I have a conversation with Grecia, she grounds me in, she's our political director. And so she really leads on building out our electoral plans, engaging with our partners to ensure that they have a theory to win and a path to power and victory in their states. And she's so grounded in all of that being shaped by the experiences of the people on the ground. And she's so grounded in seeing that, winning isn't just about delivering Michigan and making sure that, we win in the state. It's also about the transformation that the organizations on the ground go through. And I'm grateful for Grecia. And then I'm really excited to see how she continues to make community change action and our partners more fierce, more powerful, and more impactful on the ground.
Awesome. Okay, this has been a great conversation, and we're going to close it out with our signature question for all of our guests. What is your advice out there for all the brown girls listening saying, I want to be just like her?
Oh, okay. So usually I have this practice every year and I'm like, what's my word for the year? And this year I actually said, well, what's really sitting in my heart? And the phrase I came up with is soy el poder dentro de mí, which is I am the power within me. And that's, I think, my single piece of advice for brown women listening to this podcast, that so often we're trying to outsource the answers to someone else, right? Like you either follow someone on Instagram or you listen to a podcast, even this conversation. And I think it's fine to find hope in others. I think it's great to have mentors. So long as you really develop the ability to listen to what you know is right in your heart and in your gut. And we live in a world that is constantly trying to take that away from us, that's trying to make us second guess ourselves, that's trying to inject doubt into our dreams and our imagination. And so I would say to everyone who's listening, to really tap into the power that already lies within you.
Thank you so much, Lorella. We really appreciate you joining us.
It's been great. It's been fun. Thank you.
To learn more about the work Andrea and Lorella are doing, visit the show notes to find out how to support their organizations. If you have a moment, please take the time to rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. Stay up to date with us on the BGG website, www.thebgguide.com, and on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter @The BG Guide. The BGG podcast is produced by Wonder Media Network. You can find them on Instagram @WMN.media and on Twitter @WMNmedia. Until next time, brown girls. 101 women currently serve in the House of Representatives. That's a record. But still, women make up just 23.2% of the governing body. That's where Women Belong in the House comes in. From Wonder Media Network, host Ginny Kaplan seeks to understand the state of gender representation in office and asks how Congress would change if it looked more like the people it represents. Ginny speaks with experts and women in the House of Representatives to learn about what it's like to serve in a place that wasn't built for you. I joined Ginny this season to talk about why cooperation is key to policymaking. You can listen to my conversation with Ginny on episode 3 of this season. Listen and subscribe to Women Belong in the House wherever you listen to podcasts.